The subject I am interviewing is a hero and a hunter of great renown and fame. Unlike most of my subjects, she doesn't want to remain anonymous. She prefers I share her name with the world. So I meet the hero, not Itzel Akna Chac Xotchitl, or simply Sochi, in a private cafe in the Sunset Republic. She and her husband are on the hunt for lycanthropes nearby, but I am lucky enough that they could spare some time for the interview. A sad part of life is that oftentimes the circumstances of one's birth affects how the world sees you. If you are born under the wrong star, under the wrong building, under the wrong family, under the wrong society, under the wrong name, or under the wrong parents, that can affect how the world sees you. When the world sees you through one lens, it can be near impossible to change how the world sees you. So you will have to face a time where you can choose to be someone better than how the world judges you to be, or you can choose to be someone worse than what everyone suspects you to be. Sochi was born in the small town of Koba, a village near the ruins of a city of the same name. She was not born alone. She was born alongside her twin brother, a baby that would someday be known as Na Balam Akna Chac, or simply Balam for short. Their births brought a lot of great joy to Sochi's village, but also a lot of solemn fear. A traveling priest with golden eyes warned the village that Akna would give birth to two very different children. Both children would be born with great power and with far greater potential. The son would grow to be a great hero, beloved by his family, beloved by his village, beloved by his people, and beloved by his world. The daughter would grow to be an equally great villain, despised by her family, despised by her village, despised by her people, and despised by her world. And when both children are grown, there will be a great battle between them, and only when the hero has slain the villain will there be peace. And as tempted as you may be to change this fate, only the hero has the power to slay the villain, and only the villain has the power to slay the hero. It was this prophecy that Sochi was born into the world alongside her brother Balaam. I don't know the first time I was treated like trash. All I know is by my earliest memory, I was already scared of being yelled at in public. My parents tried to remain together for a few years after my birth, but by the time I was 3, they were living in different houses. Balaam lived with my dad, I lived with my mom. Things were rough. My brother got to go to school in Koba. I had to be homeschooled because every school in a 100-kilometer radius knew my story. Everyone in town hated me so much. The adults spat when I walked by. Children threw pebbles, and in time, they also learned to throw trash at me. The only reason things didn't get worse was because I was born with my powers. My mom found that out when I was 3 months old, and she left me outside in a baby carrier while she was in the store, a pretty common practice in the Triple Alliance. When she came back outside, she found a man with a knife looming over my carrier as he kept slashing and stabbing wildly at my sleeping body. His slashes tore up the fabric of the baby carrier, and people saw what he was doing. A few even tried to cheer him on. When she tried to grab me, a few of the other citizens held her back for a few seconds so the man with the knife could run away, all while she screamed at them to let her get back to me. When she made it to where I was sleeping, she saw that I was unharmed. I was still sleeping peacefully. His knife tore up my clothes and my carrier was shredded, but even at 3 months old, I couldn't register the feeling of the knife. That was how strong my skin was. My mother didn't let me out of her sight after that. My powers continued to develop while my mother homeschooled me during the day and she worked nights. I learned to call the winds to me so I could fly before I learned how to walk. I learned how to feel everyone's emotions around me before I could name the emotions. By the time I was 8 years old, I already knew that I was the hated villain of Koba. When people threw things at me and my mother, could call the winds to protect us without thinking about it. Still, I felt so much love from my mother at the time, and I knew she wanted a better life for us both. I knew she was saving up to have us move somewhere far away, somewhere we could live relatively peaceful lives, and I honestly think we could have done it if my brother didn't find out where we lived. Balaam was celebrated everywhere he went since the day he was born. Every restaurant would give him free meals. His dad could get free beer in every bar. By the time Balaam was 5 years old, he had full ride scholarships offered from every college and university in the Triple Alliance. He wanted for nothing because he never knew the word no, except as a word he could say to others, that others couldn't say back to him. To call him spoiled or even a bully would be to do disservice to the words. What do you call someone who punches another child hard enough to spit up blood and teeth while knocked out? Certainly not a bully. Bullies don't get thanked when their victims wake up. Bullies are villains. What do you call someone who burns down a house with a family inside? Certainly not a killer. That's reserved for villains like me. What do you call someone who walks into the grocer, taking everything they want without paying for a single crumb, all while the grocer holds the door open for them? Certainly not a thief. A hero would never steal, so it's just easier to give the hero whatever they want. Our parents kept us separate, shopping different schedules. I wasn't allowed in school, yet people knew who I was, and every action I did was treated with suspicion, if not outright hostility. Every store I walked into, I was followed, watched by every worker and every customer. Some were polite enough to pretend they weren't staring. Most of them didn't care about being polite to me. I still remember picking up a wooden snake I loved as I ran to show my mom, only to have the store owner scream at me and slap my hand to have me drop the snake. It didn't hurt, but the shock was enough for me to drop the snake as the store owner began to berate me for stealing and trying to run off with it. I was 10 years old. I didn't know why they hated me so much. I could feel their hate and anger roll off them in waves as I cried, overwhelmed with emotion. And as I cried, the store owner only got angrier at me, which only made me cry more, which only made them and everyone else around me angrier. Look at the little bitch trying to cry to make us feel sorry for her. Do you think we're that stupid? I remember someone yelling at me as I felt all of their anger around me, and I felt conflicted. I was always taught to never strike back. I was taught to be the bigger person. I was told to never use my powers on others. Mom knew I was more powerful than everyone else around me. If I fought back, I would hurt people, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't hurt me. That is what I kept reminding myself when the store owner threw the first punch and the others joined in. I could hear the snapping of knives on my skin, products being smashed into me, and even hear the crack of bones fracturing from trying to hurt me. I could feel their anger, their fear, and their pain when I saw my mother trying to get to me, screaming for the crowd to stop, telling them to let me go, that I was just a little girl. I reached out for her, trying to reach for her hand, and she reached out for me as well. I remember reaching for her as one of the people punched her in the face instead of trying to hit me. I don't know if it was done on purpose or by accident. All I remembered was feeling my mother's pain radiate through my eye, like I was the one who was punched. But the emotions were far worse. I could accept being a target. It was painful to have so much hate aimed at me, but I knew they couldn't hurt me. They could hurt my mother. "Stop it!" I yelled after the first punch, and suddenly the group was no longer interested in me. They were now kicking and hitting my mother as she curled up on the ground, trying to protect herself from the blows, as my body filled with pain and the crowd's anger and hatred. There was no doubt in my mind. They were going to kill my mother because they couldn't hurt me. I've called the wind to lift me before. I've even called it to push things for me or to protect me from throwing pebbles and trash. Before that moment, I never called for the wind to push anyone away. In that moment, I could feel the wind and air around me focused between my fingers, like rope sliding between every single finger, as the wind pushed the mob away from my mother and I ran up to her. Thankfully, she wasn't hurt too badly and she could still walk. As we walked out of the store, leaving the cart behind with nothing bought, I could hear whispers from the group who were knocked down. "I knew she was evil. Only a villain would hurt an innocent customer." Of course she was crying. She wanted to trick us into attacking so she could hurt us back. However, that was the first time I tasted fear that was stronger than anger. It was foul, like chocolate that turned sour rather than sweet, so you want to spit it out. Except I can't spit out what was in my heart. When we made it home, Mom quickly started packing. She warned me that since I fought back, I just made us both a target. Everyone who was hurt would now ask my brother to attack us. I thought she was being paranoid at first, until I heard the knock on the door, and just outside was Balaam. Behind him stood a large crowd, all eager to watch their hero take off the head of the villain. Both of us were just 10 years old, and already people were chanting for my blood. I turned to my mom, wondering if she had an answer, and she was frozen with fear, terrified of her own son, so I did the only thing I could think of. I opened the door. As I opened the door to my brother, before I had a chance to speak, he grabbed me and tossed me into the yard in front of everyone. I didn't need to be an empath to know what his plans were. He wanted me dead, and he would humiliate me in front of everyone while he was doing it. And I just wanted a peaceful resolution. My mouth full of dirt, I spat it out as I tried to speak again, only to have Balaam kick me in the stomach, throwing me into the air a few meters before I fell down again. "Do you think I'm dumb enough to listen to a liar like you?" Balaam said to the cheers of the crowd. "You're the villain. Every word you say is a lie. Every tear is a manipulation. Your touch is rot. Your heart is hate. Your death will bring peace, and I see no reason to wait," Balaam said as the crowd cheered his name. and I could feel his elation. He loved the attention and he loved the crowd. Maybe he loved it enough I could use it to my advantage. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said as I glanced at the house, hoping she was safe. I stood up straight as I faced my brother. Even though this was the first time we had met, I heard all of the rumors in town. He was supposed to be strong, like me. He was supposedly invulnerable as well. Unlike me, though, he did not command the wind. He commanded lightning. And I did not hear a single word about him being able to feel others' emotions. So I had to assume that ability was different as well. His face, though, was familiar. He had our mom's eyes. His hair was just as long as mine, although he wore pink with a lightning bolt on his shirt, while I wore blue with a symbol of the wind. Did we both pattern our clothes after our abilities? If so, that meant we had similar thought processes, even if we weren't the same people. I had to assume that meant he would develop the same strategy as me, so I would have to counter myself to counter him. "Time to die," Balam said as he cast one hand up to the sky like he was grabbing something above him, as he pulled his hand down like he was hammering something. I felt the lightning course through my body before I heard the crack of thunder. The electricity flowed through my body, tingling and causing every muscle in my body to tense before it was over in less than a second. I tasted copper in my mouth and I lifted my fingers to my mouth, pulling it back, revealing blood. The first time I was ever injured. Before this time, I only ever bled once a month, like most women. Here, I was injured for the first time when the lightning hit me. I must have bit my tongue when all of my muscles tensed. Although with the lightning bolt over, I stood up and cracked my neck, the stiff muscles popping, heard by the now silent crowd as Balam realized that one ace card wasn't enough to win. "Please, turn around. Go home, Balam. We don't need to be enemies. We are both better than this. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone earlier, but they were trying to hurt me. Trying to hurt Mom. Surely you can't fault me for defending myself," I asked him as he scoffed and his face turned ugly. "You're a liar. Everything you say is a lie. You weren't defending yourself. You were tricking everyone into attacking, so it looked like you were defending yourself. If you just let them hit you, then no one would have gotten hurt. You can take the blows, they can't," Balam said, as I could feel in his heart he thought this was true. He was certain and he wanted my blood, as I felt his heart scream as he charged towards me. "Forgive me," I whispered to myself as he ran towards me. Then I punched his stomach, causing him to lose his breath, and as he curled over from the pain, I punched his face with as much force as I could muster without calling upon the wind. I never fought before, but I did carry heavy things for my mother, and she taught me a little about fighting, although I could only practice on trees and rocks. She taught me if you ever fight, you have to fight like your life depends on it, because it does. She taught me how to hold my thumb on the outside of my fist, and how you punch with your entire body, not just your arm. And the most useful piece of advice, you don't punch the rock, you punch through the rock. My fist connected with Balam's nose with enough force to crack boulders. If he was a normal person, his brains would be mist in the air, but instead, all he had was a bloody nose, as he held his hands to his nose. Blood gushed down his face as the crowd whispered, and I could feel their doubt, and I could feel his fear, tempered only by his fury. He must have never needed to challenge himself before. He was already strong, and everyone gave him what he wanted, so he didn't need to learn how to hold back, and he just assumed I would be easy for him to kill. And he still wanted me dead, as I could feel that desire pound in his heart as he charged at me, as I easily sidestepped him. The crowd gasped as he grew more frustrated as he tried to charge again, only to have me sidestep again, and his ego grew even more bruised than his body, as he screamed nonsense as he failed to make contact. Die! 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 Why won't you just die? He said as he charged yet again, and I jumped into the air as the wind held me in the air, floating 3 meters in the air, looking down at him while the crowd gasped. No one had seen me fly before, but it was a skill I had practiced, and I could see in his eyes he was envious of me. I had a power he didn't have, and in front of everyone they could see the villain they hated so much was actually pretty powerful. Please stop. You're all better than this. We can stop this before anyone gets hurt, I yelled, only for my brother to raise his hand like he was readying another hammer blow. As his arm began to descend, and I easily dodged the lightning blast this time. He raised his arms again as he tried 2 lightning strikes, only for me to dodge them both yet again. While I couldn't outfly a lightning bolt, I could, however, outfly the speed he dropped his arms. And now the entire crowd could see that his most impressive power could be dodged by me. I couldn't help but giggle after his 12th attempt of hitting me with lightning. His rage burned hotter than any heartburn I had before, and after my giggle, he lifted both arms high into the air before he plunged them down onto the ground, nowhere near where I was hovering, and I could hear a double lightning crash behind me. I turned, and my blood turned to ice. No! I screamed as I tried to fly to the burning house, only for another bolt of lightning to strike me again, bringing me down to the ground as my muscles struggled to flex, like I was swimming through molasses. Before I could regain my senses, another bolt of lightning hit directly on top of me. Even if it couldn't hurt me, it kept me stunned, so I couldn't move forward. I couldn't call the wind. All I could do was stare at the flames as I heard my mother's screams inside of the home. The crowd cheered while she screamed and while the fire burned. I could feel her pain, her fear, her regrets, and I could also feel Balaam's satisfaction, and I could feel the crowd's elation. I was full of conflicting emotions as I struggled against the barrage of the lightning bolts crashing on me like the weight of the sky. Then the most terrifying sound I had ever heard in my life. The scream trailed off with no breath behind it, and less than a second later I could feel no more emotion from inside of the house. My mother was dead. Finally, the lightning stopped for a moment as I could feel Balaam's smirk. He was confident and he felt unstoppable. He just killed her to hurt me, so he believed he could hurt me. So he felt he could finally stop hitting me long enough for himself to speak. Burn like your mother, my hero brother yelled at me, as the wind listened to my call before I could even consciously plan. The wind pushed his arms to his sides, keeping him from calling for more lightning. His strength his weakness, as the air held his arms down like his hands were encased in cement gloves. "She was your mother too," I yelled as I ran at him, as he was too shocked to even try to dodge as I tackled him down, holding him down, my legs on his arms, as I called upon the air to help me as I punched his face again and again. If my punch earlier was strong enough to crack rock, then these blows were strong enough to shatter boulders. Punch after punch hit hard enough they could hear it throughout the village as I watched his face. Every emotion in the crowd was my own as I took their anger, their fear, and their hopes into my own heart to power every punch. I felt only hatred when I punched the face that was nearly identical to my own. As the black eye began to form under my mother's eyes, I screamed a wordless roar of rage as I punched his cheek. I heard and felt the crack in his jaw as his mandible dislocated, his mouth filled with blood that began to slowly drown him as I punched his other cheek. His pain was my own as I hit him again and again, as I heard the crowd scream and run. Alan's face went from looking like something I would see in the mirror to looking like ground hamburger with teeth. And yet, I kept hitting him. The only thing that stopped me was when I realized my hands were throbbing, and I paused for a moment. This pain in my hand was my own pain, not one that I was feeling empathetically from someone else. This was my own pain. The only physical pain I felt the entire fight was from bruising my fist from punching him. And here he was, broken ribs, broken nose, broken jaw, broken ego, and probably a lot more broken. He was barely breathing. I could only feel pain and humiliation from him. His ego was shattered beyond what he thought possible, and the crowd around us was still in silence, but I could still feel their fear. All of them were still afraid and disgusted by me. Not a single one of them felt even a twinge of guilt about what happened to me or my mother. In all of their eyes, I was just the villain who broke their hero. Any pain caused to me, or even the fact I was defending myself, wasn't even an incidental detail to them. They already decided who was right or wrong here. If I killed him, I would only solidify myself as a villain in their eyes. Balam was far too broken to ever hurt me again. "I'm sorry," I said as I stood and the winds carried me away into the darkness. Whether I was apologizing to the crowd, to myself, to Balam, or to my mother, I didn't know then. I do know now. All I knew was my brother was beloved by all, and I was despised by all. So that part of the prophecy was true. Xochi fled her hometown and eventually made it to a home for Ifengia's children in Zama, where she was raised and she was taught to use her abilities, and she decided that she wanted to be a hero, not a villain like her town thought she was. In time, she fell in love with Michikotl, who she married, and she joined him as a member of the Hunters Guild, where she acts as support, willing to use her powers to defend others, and only fighting as a last resort. Even all of these years later, she still feels the pain of whomever she fights. And even though it has been many years since she left Koba, Balam is still considered a hero there. He refuses to leave because he fears he will find his sister outside of the town. The people still believe he is fated to fight her to the death, and her own father is one of the most fervent supporters of that belief. Her own father, who abandoned her when she was declared a villain. Her own father, who refused to watch as she beat her brother to an inch of her life. Her own father, who let his son burn his own mother. Her own father, who raised a monster because the monster was fated to be a hero, allowing fate to fail to create hero. Her own father, who tried to stab an infant while she slept. Sochi knows that there will be a time she needs to fight her brother again, but as long as she avoids going home, she can keep telling herself he can change. She can keep telling herself that there is a peaceful resolution. She can keep telling herself that the prophecy of him being a hero can finally come true. The problem, though, is being a hero is not something that can be prophesized into being. Choices have to be made. You have to be willing to be a shield. You have to be willing to take blows from both your enemies and the people you're protecting. You have to prioritize others' safety over your own comfort. You have to understand that you may die being a hero, and you have to realize that is a price you are willing to take. And you also cannot simply be fated into being a villain. There are also many little choices that add up. Deciding that breaking a simple rule, leaving the risk, is worth it. Deciding that harming someone else to get what you want is a price you are willing to pay. You see people as objects, either obstacles or tools to your own end goals. And once you see them as objects, treating them as such happens soon after. You eventually reach a point when you realize that others will die for your goals, and you have to decide if you are willing to kill to remain a villain.